Welcome to my guide for the lore of metal. In this guide, I'll go over every single spell in the lore and tell you how to best use them to make sure you're getting the most out of them in your battles. The lore of metal is another lore of magic that is extremely focused on offense rather than defense. It has just one spell of 6 that helps your own units, and the rest are purely focused on damaging or debuffing your opponents. The damage it does is pretty good, with all of the damaging spells being reasonably okay versus armor, making it a good choice when you're going against factions that come with a heavy front line. Cost-wise, it kind of splits, with 4 of the spells costing under 10 winds of magic before overcast, but the final spell costing 18 before overcasting and a massive 28 after. Overall, I do like the lore of metal, but find it to have too few excellent use cases to justify it over others. The lore is also used by the High Elves, Norska, Warriors of Chaos, and Balthazar Gelt from the Empire. Our first spell is, of course, the passive of the lore, Metal Shifting. It targets all allied units map-wide, and becomes active whenever the Metal Spellcaster casts a spell. It grants units plus 12% armor piercing and base weapon damage for 13 seconds, which is actually a really substantial boost for a decent length of time. Combining this with a unit with super high melee attack and good damage already, and you can output a seriously massive amount of damage for as little as 4 winds of magic if you keep spamming the cheapest spell. As with most passives, using it alone will not win you the battle, but as they go, this is actually a very powerful one, so it wants to be picked up as often as you can. Our first active spell is Plague of Rust, and it's a hex spell. It costs 4 winds of magic, has a 28 second cooldown, and a 200 meter cast range. It can only be targeted on a single enemy unit, and causes this unit to lose 30 armor for 44 seconds. This can do some serious work versus median armor units, and allow some of your units that struggle against armor to put in some serious work. Overcasting increases the cost to 6 winds of magic, and increases the armor reduction to 60 armor for 44 seconds. Of course, this also comes with a 50% chance of a miscast that all overcasting does, so I won't mention that from now on. The overcast version is great for using versus heavily armoured units, and will make the job of your melee troops 10 times easier, especially if they aren't carrying tons of AP damage. This means you can get away with lower tier cheaper units further into the game, so if you're playing as a financially weak faction, this can be incredibly useful. When deciding which version to use, I'd say just look at the armour of the enemy units. If it's below 45, then stick with the regular version, but anything over, you may as well use the overcast to get the most out of the cast that you can. At the end of the day, neither version is particularly expensive, so you can spam either version plenty of times before the battle is done. Next up is Searing Doom, and it's a bombardment spell. It costs 6 winds of magic, has a 30 second cooldown, and a 200 meter cast range. It can only be cast on the ground, and causes moderate magical damage in a medium strike area for 9 seconds. This damage is best used versus a single unit with multiple entities, as too many units will spread the damage out a lot and reduce the overall value. Overcasting increases the cost to 10 winds of magic and increases the number of missiles and the size of the strike area. This version is simply for when you need more damage or need to hit a larger area with more firepower. This makes it the preferred version for using versus multiple units, as the large strike area means that missiles will hit entities from pretty much every unit caught in the area. To be honest, that's the only deciding factor between the two versions of the spell. How many units are there? If it's just one unit, then the smaller strike area works best. If it's more than one in a clump, then the larger strike zone makes more sense. Our next spell is the Glittering Cloak, and it's the only augment spell in the lore. It costs 6 winds of magic, has a 44 second cooldown, and a 200 meter cast range. It can only be cast on a single allied unit, and grants them plus 60 armor for 40 seconds. This is a massive boost in a substantial amount of time, meaning you can propel some otherwise squishy units into near unmovable line holders. Overcasting grants a spell a 40 meter area of effect, and the ability to cast it on the ground at the cost of 12 winds of magic. This is obviously the preferred version of the spell to use when you need to increase the durability of more than one of your units. This also makes it into a great choice when you're deathballing all your units into one small area, as you can make them all supremely tough at a relatively low cost. I feel it's kind of self-explanatory when you should use each of these, but we're not to the 10-minute mark yet, so I'll go over it anyway. The base version is great for targeting one specific unit with toughness, and the overcast is best used when many units need that toughness.
We interrupt our program to bring you this important message.
You there! Are you a fan of books but lack the time or attention span to sit down to read one? Then worry not. Audible is here to save the day. They have the world's largest selection of audiobooks, audio dramas, and audio shows. Basically, anything you could ever want in an audio form, Audible has you covered. They offer lifetime listening, meaning even if you cancel your plan, you can still listen to any of the books you picked up until the end of time. They have an exchange service, meaning if you get a book and realize you don't like it or will never listen to it again, you can give it back to Audible in exchange for a credit, which you can spend on any other book in their collection. It's a truly wonderful experience with 24/7 concierge-level service with a 98% satisfaction rate. They even have a handy application for your cellular device, meaning you can listen no matter where you are. You can listen in the car. You can listen in a park. You can even listen in bed to peacefully end the day before the existential dread comes and reminds you of that one argument you lost in year 3 with Jamie, where you should have insulted his mother after you insulted your father, but instead you did nothing because you're fake. So sign up today for a free trial on us. That's right, you can get an entire month for free, which includes 1 book to keep for life, and many other member-exclusive perks. Or if you're feeling particularly intellectual, you can sign up for 3 months at half the normal price. Yes, that's 3 months at half the normal price, coming in at just $3.99 a month. Now that's what I call epic. Sign up for Audible today using the links in the description and support the most epic channel this side of the internet. And now we return you to your regularly scheduled programming.
Gehenna's Golden Hounds are next up, and it's a Vortex spell. It costs 8 Winds of Magic, has a 45-second cooldown, and 150 meters cast range. It can only be cast on the ground, and causes major magical damage in a randomly moving medium-sized area of effect that lasts 13 seconds. This damage is best used versus a clump of multiple units, and has no allegiance, so has as much chance to do damage to your own units as the enemy. The damage it deals is pretty strong against even some heavy armor, and against physical resistance it's world-ending. Overcasting increases the duration to 26 seconds at the cost of 16 Winds of Magic. This increases the damage potential massively, both for the enemy units and your own, so it's imperative that you target it correctly, otherwise you're going to be looking at a lot of dead units. I think the best use of the regular version is when there are only a few enemy troops nearby, and you want to do some good damage to make the jobs of your units easier. The Overcast version is better used versus massive blobs of enemy units, like when they're stuck in a choke point, as the extended duration means more movement, so you want to make sure it has a lot of room to move into and that all of that space is filled with enemy units. Next up is the Transmutation of Lead, and it's a hex spell. It costs 11 Winds of Magic, has a 47-second cooldown, and a 200 meters cast range. It can either be cast on enemies directly or on the ground, and affects all units within its 40 meter area of effect with minus 30% base weapon damage and minus 24 melee attack for 38 seconds. This is a massive debuff to any unit, as it takes a quarter from all their weapon damage and vastly reduces the chances they'll even land a blow, meaning their damage output plummets. Overcasting increases the damage reduction to minus 60% of their base weapon damage at the cost of 16 Winds of Magic. This is an insane reduction in damage and can render some of the most high damage units in the game useless for the duration of the spell, and allow your units all the time they need to pick them to pieces. This is another one of those where the use case is fairly self-explanatory. Are the enemy units high damage or super high damage? If they're only kinda high damage, then go with the standard cast. If they're super high damage, then go for the overcast. Enough said. Finally, we come to Final Transmutation, which is a direct damage spell. It costs 18 Winds of Magic, has a 54-second cooldown, and a 100 meters cast range. It can be cast on enemies directly or on the ground, and causes direct damage to all units in the 30 meter area of effect for 8 seconds. This damage is best used versus single entities, as there is a chance to resist damage per entity affected, meaning multiple entity units take less damage per entity than if you would use it on a single entity. Overcasting increases the duration of this damage to 16 seconds at the cost of 28 Winds of Magic, which is stupidly expensive. This cost does come with some incredibly high damage potential, especially if you're targeting single entities, as the ticks of damage will evaporate any health the enemies might have. The base version of the spell is best used on lower health single entities, since there's no point doing more damage than you need when the cost is so high. It's also worth noting that since this is an area of effect spell, it's super important that you make sure you're hitting the single entity you're aiming for when you cast, rather than just plopping it down and then being unaffected. The Overcast version is best used versus full strength enemy lords and heroes that you need to focus down, but just make sure they need the cast, otherwise you're looking at a hefty Winds of Magic bill. That concludes this guide on the lore of metal. If you enjoyed this video at any point, then please do consider leaving it a like, as it really does help out a lot. Leave a comment with anything you think I missed or should include in future videos. If you'd like to see more videos about Total War Warhammer, then there are links in the description to my series. If you enjoyed this video and want to see more, then maybe click that subscribe button so you stay up to date. After all, it is free. For now though, I've been COLONELDAMNEDERS, and I'll see you next turn.